The sun has not yet reached its highest point, and the city of Rome is already alive. Not the Rome you might imagine from a postcard, not the marble-white Rome of statues and silent ruins, but the living, breathing, noisy, smelly Rome of the 1st century after Christ. You stand in the shadow of a tall insula, a crowded apartment block of timber and brick. Its top floors leaning forward slightly, as if tired of holding themselves upright after years of wind and rain. The walls are cracked in places. Laundry hangs in faded strips from small windows. Below, the narrow street is alive with the sound of footsteps on stone and the rumble of wooden wheels over the uneven paving. There is the cry of a fishmonger announcing the morning's catch. There is the rhythm of a hammer on metal from a blacksmith shop nearby. Somewhere, not far away, a donkey brays, a loud nasal protest that cuts through the other noises like a blade. The air is a mixture of scents that would seem strange to modern nostrils. There is fresh bread, warm, soft crust just beginning to harden, from a bakery that has kept its ovens burning since the first light of dawn. There is the smell of olive oil heating in a pan, ready to fry the morning's meal. But there is also the sharp tang of smoke from wood and charcoal fires, the sourness of fermenting wine from an open tavern, the unmistakable odor of animals. Goats, chickens, even pigs, kept in small pens inside the city limits. And then there is another smell, subtle but constant, the smell of the drains. Rome was a marvel of engineering with its aqueducts and its sewers, and yet, for all its greatness, the sewer's presence was never far away. The great Cloaca Maxima carried away much of the waste, but smaller drains, street gutters, and open channels made sure that the faint, unpleasant reminder of human life lingered in the air. It is here, in this mixture of splendor and filth, of beauty and decay, that our story takes place. Because in Rome, cleanliness, true cleanliness, meant something very different than it does today. Setting the scene, Rome's idea of cleanliness to a modern mind, being clean means soap and water. It means a long, hot shower, shampoo for the hair, perhaps even a splash of antiseptic to kill germs we cannot see. We think of freshness as the absence of odor, the removal of every trace of sweat or dirt. But the Romans, even the wealthiest women of the empire, lived by another standard. For them, the Latin word munditia did not mean sterile purity. It meant appearance. It meant a certain polish to the skin, a certain gloss to the hair, a pleasant scent to greet the nose. Cleanliness was about what could be seen, what could be smelled, not about what was actually removed. It is easy to imagine a Roman matron, her hair piled high in the latest fashion, her stola hanging in neat folds, her skin faintly gleaming in the lamplight, and think that she is clean. But beneath the oils and the perfumes, beneath the layers of fabric, was a body not so very different from her poorer neighbors, a body washed less often than we might guess, a body managed, maintained, but not scrubbed free of all its invisible guests. The bathhouse. Rome's pride and paradox. Rome's pride was its thermae, the great public baths. These were not just for bathing. They were places of business, of politics, of gossip, and of pleasure. In the largest bathhouses, you could find exercise yards, libraries, gardens, even small theaters. Women had their own hours or separate spaces, depending on the city and the century. In the early morning, before the men arrived, women of every class might enter, from wealthy matrons with their servants to freedwomen with a little money to spare. The first step was not water, but oil. The skin was coated with olive oil, sometimes plain, sometimes scented with herbs or flowers. The oil would be massaged in, softening the skin and loosening dirt. This was not a quick process. It was part of the experience. A wealthy woman might have a servant, or several, to work the oil into her arms, her shoulders, her legs, while she chatted idly with her companions. Once the oil had done its work, it was time for the strigil. This was a curved blade of bronze or iron, smooth but firm, designed to scrape the skin. In long, slow strokes, the oil was drawn away, carrying with it dust, sweat, and flakes of dead skin. The sensation was oddly pleasant, a light pressure, a faint warmth from the friction. But here is where the modern listener begins to wince. Because the same strigil might be used on several people without cleaning beyond a quick wipe. The oil itself, once scraped away, was sometimes collected. In some cases, it was even reused for certain medicinal or cosmetic purposes, a thought that would send a shiver down any modern spine. Oil instead of soap. Soap did exist in the Roman world, borrowed from the Gauls, but it was considered a crude thing. Useful for laundering cloth, perhaps, but not for the refined body of a Roman lady. Oil was gentler, more nourishing to the skin, or so they believed. And to be fair, under the Mediterranean sun, it did leave the skin supple and glowing. Yet oil does not kill bacteria. It does not remove all traces of odor. It masks them, softens them, mingles them with perfume. And so, even after a bath, a Roman woman might carry with her a faint human scent beneath the roses or myrrh. A social affair. Bathing was rarely private. Even for the wealthy, it was an event. Servants attended their mistresses. Friends bathed together. The bathhouse was as much about conversation as it was about hygiene. Deals were struck here, marriages arranged, fairs whispered about in corners. In the women's hours, the air was filled with the soft murmur of voices, the occasional burst of laughter. The sound of the strigil against skin was a constant background, a quiet, rhythmic scrape. The pools steamed gently, their surface broken now and then by the movement of bathers slipping in or out. The water, of course, was not replaced between each visitor. It was warmed in great basins, drawn from cisterns and shared by all who came that day. Dust, hair, oil, all of it remained in the pool until the end of the day's business. And yet, in the Roman mind, this was clean. This was health. This was the good life. The public bath was only one of many ways a Roman woman might tend to her body, but it was the most public, the most celebrated, and strangely enough, one of the least private aspects of her life. When the morning sun streamed into the apoditerium, the changing room, it lit the women's hair like halos of gold, red or deep black, depending on the dyes and wigs in fashion that year. Servants knelt beside low benches, unfastening fibulae, the brooches that held stolas and tunics in place. Tunics were slipped over heads, folded carefully, stacked in neat piles. In the corners, wicker baskets waited for sandals, jewelry, and hair ornaments. Most women did not dare to bring their finest pieces to the bathhouse. Theft was always a possibility. But even here, some could not resist a little display of status, wearing simple but well-made pins or a necklace of modest pearls. The warm room. Tepidarium. After undressing, the first stop was not the hottest bath, but the tepidarium. The air here was warm and moist, a gentle preparation for the hotter rooms to come. The floor itself gave off heat, for beneath it ran the hypocaust, an ingenious system of brick pillars that supported the floor above a constant flow of hot air from a furnace. The warmth rose not just from below, but from the walls, which were built with hollow tiles that carried heat upward. In the tepidarium, women would sit on stone benches, allowing their skin to loosen under the heat, their muscles to soften. Servants might work the oil into their limbs here, fingers moving in small circular motions pressing away stiffness. Conversation was slow and lazy in the tepidarium. This was not a place for deep discussion, but for the comfortable murmur of gossip, for compliments on a friend's new bracelet or hair arrangement. The air smelled faintly of the olive oil stored in clay jars near the wall, of the herbs steeped in the warm basins for scent. The hot room, caldarium. From the tepidarium, one passed into the caldarium. Here, the heat was intense. Steam clung to the skin, droplets forming on the arms and running slowly downward. The air was heavy, almost difficult to breathe at first, until the lungs adjusted. The pool in the caldarium shimmered with heat, and women slipped into it with slow sighs, letting the warmth close over them like a blanket. It was here that the strigil work truly began. Oil would be reapplied, thick, warm, sometimes mixed with a touch of pumice powder for a faint scrubbing effect. The strigil's curve glided along the skin, scraping away oil, sweat, and dirt in a slow, deliberate rhythm. There was no hurry. A wealthy woman might linger for half an hour, her servant working carefully over her body. The scraping did not hurt when done properly. It was almost soothing, the sound a soft shick-shick against the skin. And yet it is here that modern sensibilities might squirm. The oil once removed often carried with it hair, dust, and the fine gray residue of the day's grime. It might fall to the floor, be wiped with a cloth, or simply be flicked aside to mix with the moisture on the tiles. Few worried about such things. The warmth and the scraping were believed to draw impurities from the body, to keep the skin youthful, the flesh firm. Perfumes and covering odor, once the scraping was done, the body was rubbed again, this time with perfumed oil. Rose, lily, violet, myrrh, cinnamon, scents imported from every corner of the empire. Perfume in Rome was powerful, sometimes almost overwhelming. A woman might leave the bath trailing a cloud of it, the fragrance clinging to her for hours. It was both a pleasure and a signal, a way to announce oneself before a word was spoken. The perfume, of course, did not make her cleaner in the way we think of it. It layered itself over the natural scent of the body, creating something complex and human. To a Roman, this was entirely acceptable. To them, cleanliness was not the absence of smell, but the presence of a pleasant one. The cold room, frigidarium. For the bold, or for those who believed in its health benefits. The final stop was the frigidarium. Here, the water was cold, the air brisk. The plunge into the basin was a shock after the caldarium, a gasp-inducing moment that left the skin tingling. The cold was thought to close the pores, to seal in the benefits of the hot bath and the oiling. It also invigorated the spirit, sharpening the senses before returning to the world outside. But many women, especially older ones, skipped this step, preferring to linger in the warmth until it was time to dress. Dressing again. When the bathing was done, the process of dressing was slow and careful. Clean tunics and stolas were drawn over freshly oiled skin, the fabric sticking slightly before settling into place. Hair, damp from the steam, was arranged once more. Pins slid into place, braids adjusted. Some women applied light cosmetics here, others waited until home. Rouge for the cheeks, a trace of kohl for the eyes, perhaps a touch of white lead to pale the complexion. These two were part of the Roman definition of cleanliness, the presentation of a polished, composed self to the public eye. Private baths, a similar ritual not every Roman woman bathed in the public thermae. The wealthiest had private facilities in their villas, smaller in scale but similar in process. The oiling, the scraping, the perfuming were the same, though perhaps done with more expensive oils, more elaborate perfumes. And yet, even in these private baths, the water was not treated as we treat it now. It was changed irregularly, heated in great bronze boilers and poured into marble basins, but without filtration or disinfection. The illusion of cleanliness. By the end of this ritual, a Roman woman looked and smelled like the ideal of her society. Her skin was smooth, glistening faintly. Her hair was arranged in graceful coils. Her clothing was fresh, her scent rich with flowers and spice. And yet, the microbes of the ancient world still clung to her. The dust of the streets, the residue of shared water, the faint traces of human contact in every step of the bathing process, all were still present. To the Romans, this was irrelevant. What mattered was the surface, the impression, the sensory experience. The dirt was gone from sight, and that was enough. Private quarters and daily grooming in the cool shadows of a Roman domus, the private life of a wealthy woman moved at a pace entirely her own. The atrium, the large central hall, opened into smaller chambers, each with its own purpose. For the mistress of the house, one of the most important was her cubiculum. The private sleeping and dressing room, and the gyneceum, the women's quarters where female slaves and attendants worked. Here, away from the noise of the street and the echo of the bathhouse, grooming took on a different tone. It was quieter, more deliberate. The day's light, filtered through linen curtains, fell in soft patterns across the floor mosaic, perhaps depicting sea creatures, perhaps a scene from a myth. The air was scented not with strong perfumes, but with the faint aroma of the oils and powders stored in little boxes and amphorae on a low table. The dressing table, the Roman toilette, was not a single object, but an arrangement of small pieces. Bronze mirrors polished to a high sheen, catching the sunlight in soft flashes. Wooden combs, their teeth carefully spaced, some fine for smoothing hair, others wide for detangling. Ivory spatulas for mixing cosmetics. Small ceramic jars for rouge, kohl, and powdered minerals. There might be a shallow dish for holding scented oil, and beside it a soft cloth for applying it to the skin. Wealthy women preferred oil from almonds, sesame, or imported roses, thick and luxurious, to be rubbed into the arms, legs, and face. The oils, of course, did not come without their peculiarities. Stored too long in the heat, they could develop a faint, rancid edge. Mixed with certain herbs, they could stain the skin if left on too long. And always, they left a sheen that modern eyes might mistake for sweat. Hair, the crown of the Roman woman's hair, was a matter of pride, identity, and status. A wealthy woman might spend hours having hers arranged each day, often in elaborate braids, coils, and knots inspired by the latest fashion in the imperial court. This work required a skilled ornatrix, a personal hairdresser's slave whose duties were both artistic and intimate. She would stand behind her mistress, comb in one hand, pins in the other, twisting, braiding, and binding until the hair stood in precisely the right shape. But hair care was not free of unpleasantness. The combing might reveal lice, an entirely common problem even among the wealthy. Small bronze lice combs, with teeth so fine they could barely be seen, were part of the standard grooming kit. The ornatrix might work them methodically through the hair, pausing to crush what she found between her nails. The mistress would often pretend not to notice. This, too, was simply life in Rome. Cosmetics and skin care to the Roman mind. Cosmetics were not purely for beauty. They were part of cleanliness. Pale skin was desirable, as it signified a life spent indoors, away from the labor of the fields. Achieving this often meant applying a paste of white lead mixed with vinegar, which gave the skin a smooth, pale surface, but also slowly poisoned it. For the cheeks, a touch of red was added, perhaps from ground cinnabar or red ochre. The lips might be darkened with a similar mixture. The eyes were lined with kohl, both for beauty and, some believed, to protect against the glare of the sun. The scent of these preparations was strong, metallic, earthy, sometimes bitter. Mixed together on the skin, they formed a perfume of their own, layered over the natural scent of the body and the oils beneath. Dental care, or the lack of it, teeth, were not a major focus of Roman grooming, at least not in the way we think today. There were tooth powders made from ground charcoal, pumice, or crushed bones, mixed with herbs to freshen the breath. These were rubbed onto the teeth with a finger or small cloth. But toothpaste as we know it did not exist, and dental hygiene was minimal. Sweet wines, honey desserts, and a diet with frequent grit from stone-ground flour all took their toll. A wealthy Roman woman might mask bad breath with scented lozenges or mouth rinses made from wine and herbs. But tooth decay and gum disease were common. Even the most beautiful smile might reveal darkened enamel or missing teeth. Clothing and the feel of fabric once hair was arranged, skin oiled, and cosmetics applied. It was time to dress. The underlayer was a simple tunica, often of fine linen, soft against the skin. Over this came the stola, the long, sleeveless gown worn by married women, usually of wool, sometimes silk if she could afford it. It was fastened with brooches at the shoulders and belted at the waist. The fabric itself carried its own scents. Wool could hold the faint musk of the sheep it came from. Silk could smell of the oils used to preserve it. Fresh laundering was rare. Garments were often merely aired out between wearings, their odors masked with perfume or incense smoke. Shoes and the streets outside on her feet. A woman might wear simple leather sandals. These were practical for the climate, but the streets of Rome were not gentle. Dust, refuse, and the constant waste from both humans and animals made walking a messy affair. Even the cleanest, most polished sandals might return from the market splattered with unpleasant traces of the city. Upon returning home, a servant would wipe them down, perhaps rub them with oil to soften the leather, but never truly clean them in the modern sense. The midday rest, by midday, much of the personal grooming was complete, and the rhythm of the house slowed. In summer, shutters were drawn to keep out the heat. The mistress might recline on a couch, sipping diluted wine, attended by a fan-bearer. In these quiet hours, the carefully maintained illusion of cleanliness was preserved. The oiled hair, the smooth skin, the scent of roses and spices drifting faintly in the air. And yet, beneath it all, the realities of ancient hygiene remained. The oils would grow tacky in the heat, the cosmetics would smudge, the breath lozenge would dissolve to reveal what lay beneath. The appearance was everything. The reality, invisible, ignored, was simply part of being Roman. Jewelry and the last touches of presentation. After dressing, a Roman woman rarely considered herself ready without jewelry, and these were not small accents. Thick, twisted gold necklaces might rest heavy against her chest, leaving faint marks on her oiled skin. Large earrings of amber, pearl, or gemstone could tug uncomfortably at the lobes, especially during the hotter hours of the day. Bracelets were often worn in multiples, clinking softly as she moved. Some were carved with intricate patterns, others shaped like serpents or mythical beasts. They could trap sweat against the skin beneath, producing that faint sourness of metal and moisture combined. A scent hidden, but always present in the folds of life before modern hygiene. Rings were a mark of wealth and influence. On some days, she might wear so many that her fingers felt weighed down. The metal slightly cool at first, then warming to her body heat. These ornaments were not cleaned daily, not in the way we imagine. Dust, traces of oil, and the faint accumulation of skin would sit in the grooves and beneath the stones until a servant polished them for special occasions. Perfume, masking more than scent, Romans were enthusiastic about perfumes, and for good reason. In a world without deodorant as we know it, scent was both a pleasure and a necessity for the wealthy, who wished to avoid smelling like the streets. Perfumes could be floral, rose, lily, violet, or spicy, with cinnamon, myrrh, and cassia. They were stored in delicate glass or alabaster bottles, each small enough to fit in a palm. The application was slow, deliberate. A drop on the wrists, a trace on the neck, a little dab on the hem of the garment so the scent would rise subtly as she moved. Yet, perfumes could be intense. In summer heat, mixed with natural body oils and cosmetics, they sometimes became almost cloying, sweet to the point of being oppressive. The effect was layered. Rose over almond oil over the faint temps of lead-based face paint, an aroma that would have been considered alluring then, but perhaps overpowering to modern senses. The hairdresser's daily struggles, while hair was the crown of beauty, it was also a constant battle. Without modern shampoos, Romans cleaned hair with warm water and oil, sometimes using ash or crushed herbs to absorb excess grease. But between washings, hair would grow heavy with natural oils, collecting dust from the city air. The ornatrix, the personal hairdresser, would have to work with whatever state the hair was in. Combing could be a lengthy ordeal, with tugging, small knots, and the occasional unwelcome discovery of lice or nits. Lice combs, tiny, with teeth so close together they looked like a single ridge, were worked slowly through each section. If she found a louse, the ornatrix might pick it out, pinch it between her nails, and flick it away or crush it. This was not unusual. It was part of the rhythm of daily grooming in ancient Rome, as ordinary as trimming a nail or tying a braid. The mistress would often sit silently, sometimes sipping watered wine, sometimes reading aloud a bit of poetry as the work continued. Cosmetics and layers applying makeup was almost ceremonial. First came the white lead paste for the skin, giving the face that sought after pale glow. Then, a soft red tint for the cheeks and lips. The eyes would be lined with kohl, drawn carefully along the lids to elongate the shape. The powders and pastes were stored in tiny containers, some carved from bone, others made from imported glass. Dipping the applicator, often a small stick or even a fingertip, into the substance was a tactile act. The textures varied. Smooth cream for rouge, gritty mineral for eyeliner, chalky dust for whitening. Once on the face, the layers would mingle with the skin's own oils. Over the course of the day, the effect would shift. The white might crack slightly at the edges. The rouge could fade unevenly. The kohl might smudge into the corners of the eyes. There were no makeup wipes, no instant fixes. Touch-ups meant reapplying over whatever was already there, and by evening, the mixture could be thick. With the scent of lead and herbs lingering faintly, the subtle sounds of the quarters while the mistress prepared herself. The quarters were filled with a soft background symphony, the gentle scrape of a comb through hair, the faint clink of bracelets sliding on, the muffled pop of a tiny stopper being pulled from a perfume bottle, the quiet brush of fabric against skin as the stola settled into place. These sounds, ordinary to Roman ears, would be as distinct as the ticking of a clock is to us. Outside, there might be the distant hum of the marketplace, vendors calling, carts rolling, the occasional bray of a donkey. Inside, the cool dimness of the quarters felt insulated from the chaos, a little pocket of ritual and routine, eating and the mid-morning snack before leaving the quarters for social duties or visiting the baths. A wealthy Roman woman might take a light meal. Bread, olives, figs, and cheese were common, sometimes with a drizzle of honey. Sweet wine could accompany it, though often diluted. These foods had their own textures and smells. The bread, baked in communal ovens, could carry a faint smokiness. The cheese might be sharp, almost pungent, depending on its age. The olives, preserved in brine, could leave a slick trace of oil on the fingers. After eating, she might rinse her mouth with wine or an herbal infusion, not necessarily to clean, but to freshen breath. Any true cleaning of the teeth would be brief, a rub with tooth powder at most. Final adjustments before the day, a quick glance into the polished bronze mirror, a last pat to settle the folds of the stola, perhaps another drop of perfume. The ornatrix might smooth a stray hair, a handmaiden might adjust the belt at the waist. Then, stepping into the sandals, the mistress would be ready to move beyond the private quarters into the more public spaces of the house, and eventually, the city. The transformation was complete. She appeared the image of elegance, refinement, and cleanliness. But beneath the oils, the powders, and the perfumes, the realities of Roman hygiene remained untouched, hidden, ignored, and accepted as simply the way of life. The social stage, the thermae, were never just about bathing. They were a stage where life's quiet dramas unfolded under vaulted ceilings and over mosaicked floors. For a wealthy Roman woman, the moment she stepped inside was the moment she became part of an intricate, unspoken performance. The baths were a kind of living forum, not for politics, but for the subtler exchanges of status, reputation, and influence. The rustle of fine linen being removed in the appetiterium, the gleam of gold bracelets catching the lamplight, the measured laughter shared with exactly the right people. All of these were signals. And yet, beneath the marble and the perfumes, there was always the physical truth. Damp air, heavy with breath, moisture clinging to skin and stone alike, and the constant mingling of many bodies in a confined space. Unspoken etiquette, certain customs were observed without being written down. Never scrape yourself in silence. Conversation was expected. Never overheat in the caldarium. Lingering too long made one appear unwell or desperate. Always be seen greeting certain people. Absence of a greeting could be interpreted as a snub. The baths were full of subtle games. One woman might pause in the tepidarium long enough for another to notice the fine embroidery on her towel. Another might deliberately stand where the light caught the carved handles of her ivory oil flask. The smallest gestures could carry meaning, and an observant visitor could read an entire web of relationships in the seating arrangement alone. Gossip in the steam. If the forum was the place for political deals, the baths were the place for whispered truths. Words carried differently in steam. Softer, muffled, yet oddly intimate. A casual exchange between two women might seem trivial. Your husband didn't come with you today. He's been at the games all week. But in the slow, almost drowsy rhythm of the baths, such remarks could be seeds for rumor. Someone would remember them later, perhaps after a cup of wine, and repeat them with a slight twist. It wasn't unusual for news of affairs, business failures, or family quarrels to spread through the bathhouses long before reaching the streets. The flirtation of proximity, though the thermae had separate facilities for men and women, or separate hours in shared spaces. The boundaries were not always strict. Slaves moved between rooms, messengers passed through, and in certain private suites attached to the larger complexes, the separation could be blurred entirely. The Roman bath, with its dim light, soft steam, and loosened garments, was a place where modesty relaxed. Here, a brush of hands during oiling could be deliberate. A shared towel could carry meaning. Even the choice of scent. Heavy myrrh instead of light rose might speak volumes to the right observer. Shared tools and lingering traces. Beneath the elegance of the ritual lay a reality that modern sensibilities might find unsettling. Strigils, unless owned privately, were often shared. A servant might scrape one woman's arm, then another's, rinsing the blade in the same shallow bowl between uses. The oil, once scraped from the skin, was sometimes collected. In some places, it was thrown away. In others, especially smaller or cheaper baths, it could be reused in ways best left undescribed. The pools themselves were rarely drained daily. The caldarium's hot pool might remain filled for days, to water-absorbing oils, sweat, and other contributions from countless visitors. Warmth and moisture, combined with constant human contact, made these spaces perfect environments for unseen growths and lingering odors that perfumes could only partly mask. Disease in the marble halls. Though Romans prized the bath for health, the close quarters and shared environment meant that skin conditions and mild illnesses could pass easily. It was not uncommon for people to leave the baths with itching rashes or minor infections. Medical writers of the time even cautioned against visiting during certain seasons when fevers were common. Yet the lure of the baths was stronger than the fear. The comfort, the social necessity, the pleasure of warmth on cool days outweighed the risk. The soundscape of the baths. To walk through the baths with one's eyes closed was to experience a layered world of sound. The deep slosh of water displaced by movement. The scrape of metal strigils against oiled skin. The faint hiss and pop from the hypocaust fires beneath the floors. The muffled laughter from a group of friends in the tepidarium. The echo of footsteps on wet marble. These sounds blended into a constant hypnotic backdrop, one that could lull a visitor into a kind of waking dream. As they moved from room to room, scents of the bath, no single aroma defined the baths. It was always a mingling. The sharp green of olive oil, the sweetness of rose and lavender, the earthiness of myrrh, the mineral temps of heated stone, and the faint underlying musk of human presence. For some, this blend was comforting, a sign of civilization. For others, especially visitors from outside the city, it could be overwhelming. But it was unmistakably Roman, a sensory signature of the empire's public life. Leaving at dusk, by the time a woman stepped back out into the cooling air of evening, her hair roiled and pinned, her skin lightly perfumed, and her garments fresh, she might feel renewed. Yet the reality was that her cleanliness was an illusion crafted by oils, scraping, and scent. Still, to her and her peers, this was the height of hygiene, a ritual both personal and public, physical and social, soothing and strategic. When the steam of the public bath had faded from her skin, and the faint scent of myrrh clung to her garments, a Roman woman returned home not to end her care, but to continue it. Public bathing was a performance, but the true work of maintaining the illusion of perpetual freshness happened in the privacy of her cubiculum, her bedchamber, and adjoining spaces, where slaves and attendants became silent extensions of her will. We imagine history as coarse and hurried, but the wealthy Roman morning was anything but. It moved with a kind of ceremonial slowness, each action deliberate, each tool and ingredient chosen not merely for necessity, but for the quiet pleasure of handling something fine. 1. Awakening the day, she might awaken to the sound of a light knock, not sharp enough to startle, but steady enough to coax her from dreams. The chamber smelled faintly of lamp oil and whatever perfume had been burned the night before. The shutters remained half closed. Sunlight entered as narrow bands of gold, dust motes, drifting lazily in the air. A waiting slave would bring a shallow bronze basin, its surface trembling with cool water drawn from a cistern. Another carried a soft linen cloth, worn to smoothness by many washings. This was not for bathing in the modern sense. That had been done or would be done later, but for the gentle wiping of the face and arms, a symbolic refreshment as much as a practical one. The water itself might be scented. In wealthier homes, rose petals could be steeped in it briefly, just enough to impart a faint aroma that clung for the first part of the day. 2. Hair. The crown and its demands. The hair was the first true labor. Roman women prized elaborate styles, braids coiled high, curls arranged artfully over the forehead, sometimes adorned with pins of ivory or bone, sometimes with beads of glass or even gold. But maintaining such hair was work, and not always pleasant. A slave known as an ornatrix oversaw the process. She would begin by oiling the scalp lightly, both to add sheen and to tame stray hairs. The oil could be olive, but sometimes almond or castor was used. To combat odor, oils could turn rancid quickly in heat. They were often infused with herbs, rosemary, bay, or lavender. Detangling was done with combs of boxwood or bone, their teeth slightly uneven from use. These combs were not always gentle, and tugging was inevitable. A wealthy woman might sit stoically through the process, but written accounts mention muttered curses exchanged between mistress and attendant, and even complaints about hair being pulled out in clumps. False hair was common, especially for creating towering arrangements. This hair was sometimes sourced from slaves or purchased from merchants who dealt in human hair, and it was not always clean. Fleas and lice could pass from wig to wearer, leading to discreet scratching behind jeweled pins when in public. 3. Skin. The illusion of smoothness, the Roman idea of beauty prized a pale, even complexion. Achieving this required both gentle and harsh measures. First came cleansing. In the absence of soap, a paste of fine sand, ground pumice, and oil might be rubbed onto the skin, then wiped away. This exfoliated and left a certain softness, but it also left tiny scratches that could sting if perfumes were applied too soon. Whitening agents were popular. Lead-based powders, now known to be toxic, were mixed with chalk and applied to the face and neck to achieve a pale look. Some women preferred flour dusted lightly over oiled skin. Others used mixtures containing vinegar and honey, which were believed to refine the complexion. For blush, red ochre or crushed madder root could be applied sparingly to the cheeks. Lip color could be made from similar pigments, though the texture was grainy and the taste unpleasant if it touched the tongue. 4. Teeth and mouth. Scent before cleanliness dental care was more about breath than true oral hygiene. The Romans did have tooth powders, mixtures of charcoal, powdered bone, or even ground shells, which could scrub away debris. But these powders were abrasive, and frequent use could wear teeth down. Mouthwashes were more creative. One recipe called for wine mixed with myrrh, another for vinegar infused with mint. There were even accounts of rinses made from goat's milk or urine, the latter being valued for its ammonia content, which could whiten teeth but carried an unmistakable odor of its own. Sweet-smelling seeds, like anise or fennel, could be chewed to freshen the breath before social gatherings. In private, however, breath might still carry the taints of wine, oil, or garum, the fermented fish sauce so beloved in Roman cooking. 5. Dressing the body. Layers and linen. Roman women wore a long tunic of linen next to the skin, sometimes bound with a simple belt. Over this came the stola, the long outer garment that signaled marital status and respectability. Beneath all of it, there was no undergarment in the modern sense. Support, if needed, came from bands of cloth wrapped tightly around the chest. Laundering was not a frequent task. Linen absorbed sweat and oils, and over time, it yellowed. Whitening was attempted by soaking garments in solutions containing Fuller's earth or lye, and in some cases, human urine, collected in public jars for this purpose. The ammonia acted as a cleaning agent, but the process was hardly fragrant. Clothes were aired more often than washed, hung where breezes could pass through them. Perfume sachets might be stored with folded garments to mask any lingering odor. 6. The management of odor. Without modern deodorants, odor control was an ongoing concern. Perfumed oils were applied to the underarms, wrists, and behind the ears. These were sometimes heavily scented, strong enough to mingle with the general aroma of the streets and markets. In summer, small cloth pads could be tucked beneath the arms to absorb sweat. In winter, heavier garments slowed perspiration, but enclosed spaces could still become stifling. Some women carried small boxes of incense or pastilles to be burned discreetly before entering a gathering, allowing the smoke to cling to their garments and veil other smells. 7. The private toilet. The home toilet was not always a separate, enclosed room. In wealthier houses, a small chamber might be set aside with a bench of stone or wood, a hole leading to a cesspit, or, if fortunate, a connection to the city's sewer system. A sponge on a stick. The tersorium served in place of toilet paper. In public latrines, these were communal, rinsed in a bucket of water between uses. In private homes, a family might have their own, kept in a container of vinegar or salt water to discourage odors. This part of life was practical, unremarkable to the Romans. Yet for us, it is perhaps the clearest reminder that their concept of cleanliness was not ours. Ending the ritual when the preparations were complete. Hair arranged, skin smoothed and painted, breath freshened as best it could be. The Roman woman stepped into the day fully assembled. She carried on her person the sum of her morning's labor. The oils, the pigments, the scents, and the carefully maintained illusion of unchanging beauty. It was a fragile illusion, easily undone by the heat of the sun, the dust of the streets, or the crush of a crowded banquet. But it could always be rebuilt the next day and the next, each morning beginning again with water in a basin, oil on the hair, and the quiet hands of the attendants who knew every step by heart. Seasonal variations in Roman women's hygiene rituals. Roman life unfolded beneath a Mediterranean sun, where the rhythm of the seasons dictated not only agricultural cycles, but also the most intimate patterns of personal care. The wealthy woman's mourning, though grounded in habit, adapted subtly to the changing months. 1. Summer, the season of heat and dust. The Roman summer was a challenge to any attempt at freshness. Days could rise into sweltering heat by mid-morning, especially in the crowded, stone-paved city where heat radiated upward from streets and walls. In summer, hair oils shifted toward lighter blends. Instead of the heavier olive oil used in cooler months, almond or safflower oil was favored for being less greasy. These were infused with stronger herbs, rosemary, thyme, or bay, whose scents were thought to repel insects and mask sweat. Cleansing happened more than once a day. A wealthy woman might have her arms, neck, and face wiped down at midday with cloths dipped in cool rosewater or diluted wine vinegar. Vinegar was believed to refresh the skin and close the pores against excess perspiration. Garments, too, were lighter. Linen replaced wool for the inner tunic, and sleeves were kept short. Yet the dust of summer streets clung stubbornly to fabric, requiring more frequent beating of garments to shake it out. Sandals left the feet exposed to dirt, and a small basin for foot washing was often kept ready near the household entrance. Perfumes took on a sharper tone. Heavier floral or resin-based scents would be overwhelming in the heat. Instead, citrus oils imported at high cost, or diluted rose adders were dabbed lightly, not only at the pulse points but sometimes along the inside of garments, so that movement released the aroma gradually. 2. Winter. The season of stillness and smoke winter in Rome was milder than in northern lands. But it was still damp, and stone floors held a penetrating chill. Fires were lit more often, filling rooms with smoke that clung to hair and garments, a smell not entirely unpleasant, but one that mixed oddly with perfume. Hair oils in winter returned to heavier olive-based mixtures, sometimes thickened with beeswax, to help tame flyaway hairs in the dry indoor air. The warmth of the oil was part of the comfort. Attendants might even heat it slightly before combing it through the hair. Skincare became richer as well. Without central heating, the skin could become dry and cracked from exposure to cold winds and sudden changes in temperature. Thick balms made from animal fat, beeswax, and herbs were massaged into the hands and feet, especially at night. Clothing was layered. Under the stola, additional wraps or undertunics were worn. These were harder to launder and often stored through the warmer months with strong-smelling herbs to keep moths at bay. By winter's end, these layers carried the scent of both storage and the seasoned SUs, a mixture of smoke, sweat, and oils. Bathing frequency often decreased in winter. Instead of full immersion, the wealthy woman might rely on partial washings at home, reserving the full bathhouse ritual for special days. Heated rooms at the thermae were welcome then, but the cold streets between home and bath were less inviting. 3. Spring. Renewal and lightness spring brought not only new blossoms, but also a sense of renewal in household routines. Stored garments were unpacked, beaten to remove dust, and sometimes washed before wearing. This was also a time for hair trimming and reshaping styles, a symbolic fresh start. Skincare shifted toward lighter ointments again, and flowers, violets, lilies, were steeped in oil for new perfumes. The scent of violet was especially prized for its association with freshness and youth. This was also a time for mild cleansing regimens. Masks made from honey and egg whites, scrubs from fine-ground legumes, and rinses of rainwater collected in clean jars. Rainwater, softer than water from the aqueducts, was thought to make the hair shinier and the skin smoother. 4. Autumn. Preservation and preparation. Autumn was the season of storing, not just food, but also beauty materials. Oils were purchased and sealed in amphorae. Herbs were dried for infusions. Heavy garments were repaired in readiness for winter. Hair oils might take on richer scents again, with warming spices like cinnamon or cardamom, believed to stimulate the body and protect against the chill. Footwear shifted from sandals to closed shoes, which meant more careful washing of the feet to prevent odor. Bathing in autumn still carried the languor of summer, but the shortening days gave it a more hurried air. Evening perfumes grew warmer, echoing the hearth smoke and the spiced wines now appearing on the table. Hygiene during travel. Whether to the countryside, a seaside villa, or another city disrupted the orderly rituals of hygiene. Without the full array of household slaves, a woman relied on a smaller retinue, which meant that her beauty and cleanliness routines had to be simplified. Portable kits existed. Small wooden or bronze boxers containing combs, pins, small flasks of oil, a mirror of polished bronze, and a tiny container of tooth powder. Water on the road could be brackish or scarce, so cleansing was often done with cloths moistened from a private supply. Perfume became more essential during travel. The dust of the road, the smell of animals, and the closeness of covered litters or carriages could be oppressive. Attendants burned small cones of incense at stops to scent garments and hair. Bathing during travel depended on local facilities. At an inn or country villa, a bath might be no more than a heated tub. At a public bathhouse along the road, one had to share space with strangers and accept water of uncertain freshness. Hygiene in times of pregnancy or illness. Pregnancy altered the entire routine. Heavier perfumes could become intolerable to the senses, and certain oils were replaced with milder ones, such as chamomile or rose. Baths were sometimes shortened or cooled under the belief that excessive heat could harm the unborn child. Skincare shifted toward preventing stretch marks, though the methods were more symbolic than effective, such as rubbing the belly with olive oil or soft animal fat. Illness, too, affected hygiene. Feverish patients were sometimes sponged down with cool water and vinegar. The room would be fumigated with herbs or resins to purify the air. In such times, beauty took a lesser place, and cleanliness became an act of comfort rather than display. In the grand story of ancient Rome, we often hear of marble baths, of shimmering fountains, of aqueducts stretching like stone ribbons across the countryside. But if we step away from the gleaming surface, we find another side of the Roman relationship with water, a side far less polished, and yet just as essential to daily life. This is the story of the Roman toilet, a story not told in the marble halls, but whispered in the quiet spaces between. The public latrine. Imagine you step through a shaded archway. The air is cooler here and carries the faint scent of damp stone. Before you is a long, rectangular chamber. The walls are plain, the floor smooth. Along each side, a low stone bench runs the length of the room. Cut into the benches are evenly spaced, oval openings. Beneath them, steady trickle of water flows through a channel, carrying waste away. No partitions, no curtains, no privacy. Here you would sit, among strangers. Senators, merchants, travelers, and slaves, all using the same space. Conversation often continued as if nothing unusual was happening. Deals struck, gossip shared, plans made. While the business of the body went on, a sponge on a stick. Beside your feet runs another shallow channel, this one filled with cleaner water, and here is where you would find the tersorium, a wooden stick, with a sponge affixed to one end. It was the Roman equivalent of toilet paper. You would dip it into the water, cleanse yourself, and then leave it for the next person to use. Yes, the same sponge, shared among many. The water, sometimes refreshed, sometimes not. Some say vinegar was kept nearby to rinse the sponge between uses. Others doubt that such care was common. The sewers below. Beneath the streets, beneath the markets, beneath the very feet of Rome. The Cloaca Maxima, the great sewer, wound its way to the Tiber River. It carried the waste of the city away, but not always quickly. On hot days, the scent rose back up through the drains. In times of heavy rain, the sewers could flood, bringing their contents up into the streets. The water that fed the baths, the fountains, and yes, even some kitchens, came from the aqueducts. But not every source was pure, and so, water that looked clean could carry unseen dangers. In the private home. In wealthy houses, a toilet might be tucked in a corner near the kitchen or the slave quarters. A simple seat, over a pot or a small drain connected to the sewer. Servants emptied and cleaned these pots, often into the streets at night when the law allowed refuse to be thrown from upper windows. The call, guard low. Beware the water, echoed centuries later in medieval Europe. The smell of the city Rome was alive with scents. Baking bread from the corner stall, warm oil from the baths, perfumes trailing from silk-clad women. But woven among these was the sour tang of the drains, the sharp bite of animal dung in the streets, the faint, constant odor of too many people living close together. This was not the Rome of marble postcards. This was the Rome that lived and breathed, in all its unvarnished reality. Why it mattered, and yet? These toilets, these sewers, were an engineering triumph for their time. Other cities lacked such systems entirely. Without them, disease spread faster, waste built up in the streets, and life was shorter. Rome's solutions, imperfect as they were, allowed a city of over 1 million people to exist at all. They remind us that civilization is not only built in its temples, but in the humble, hidden places where daily life must happen. So, as we drift further into the slow currents of history, remember that behind every grand facade, there are rooms without windows, quiet channels underfoot, and the soft, steady sound of water, always moving away. The Rome of our imagination is often a city of grandeur. We see the towering columns, the wide sunlit forums, the sound of sandals tapping against polished stone. We hear the splash of fountains, the hum of markets, the quiet dignity of statues staring out over the crowd. But that is only one Rome. There is another, beneath the marble surface. A Rome where life was not only about public speeches and polished villas, but also about the unavoidable, intimate needs of the human body. A step into the shadowed chamber, picture yourself in a quieter part of the city. You walk down a narrow lane where tall brick walls on either side block out the wind. There is a doorway here, unadorned, plain, yet well used. You step through and the air changes. The light grows softer, dimmed by the shadows of stone. The temperature drops just slightly. A faint sound reaches your ears, the trickle of water flowing somewhere unseen. And beneath that, an odor, not sharp, but unmistakable, the scent of use. Your eyes adjust, and you see it. A rectangular chamber. The walls, simple and undecorated, bear the marks of time, patches of discoloration from years of moisture. Along two sides of the room, low benches of smooth stone stretch from one end to the other. Carved into these benches are neat, oval openings. They are evenly spaced, each one large enough to sit comfortably. And below them, a dark channel runs the length of the benches. Water moves slowly there, not rushing, but steady, carrying waste toward the unseen network below. The public latrine ritual here. In this room, there is no privacy. Men sit side by side. Senators in their fine tunics, merchants still smelling faintly of the market, travelers with dusty sandals, slaves carrying baskets or tools. Conversations flow as freely as the water below. Some speak of politics, of who spoke in the Senate that morning. Others murmur about the latest market prices for olive oil or grain, and a few lean closer to share a piece of gossip about a neighbor or a wealthy patron. The soundscape is unique. The murmur of voices, the occasional scrape of sandals on stone, the slow-moving water, and sometimes laughter. For here there is no shame in the body's needs. The Romans saw this as natural. It's a part of life to be met in company rather than isolation. The tersorium, the shared sponge beside your feet. Just in front of the bench, another shallow channel of water flows. Here, you would find a long wooden stick with a sponge tied to one end. This was the torsorium. When you finished, you would reach for it, dip the sponge into the water, cleanse yourself. When you were done, you would rinse it and set it back for the next person. Some say vinegar or salted water was kept nearby in small jars for extra cleansing. Others believe that in most places the same water was used all day, growing steadily murkier. As the hours passed, the tersorium was shared by everyone who visited that latrine. A practical tool, but one that, in our modern minds, carries a certain discomfort. And yet, for the Romans, it was normal, a part of the rhythm of daily life. The cloaca maxima, Rome's hidden artery beneath your feet, deep below the city. A great stone channel runs through the darkness. The Cloaca Maxima, the Great Sewer, is one of Rome's oldest and most impressive works of engineering, built first by the kings of the city and expanded over centuries. It still carries the water and waste of Rome to the Tiber River. Imagine walking down there. In the cool dimness, the air thick with the scent of damp stone and flowing water. The vaulted ceiling arches above you, cut from massive stones so precisely fitted that even after centuries, they hold fast. The water moves steadily, carrying with it not just human waste, but the runoff from streets, markets, and workshops. But the system was not perfect. In times of heavy rain, the sewers could back up, pushing their contents upward into the streets. On hot days, gases rose from the drains, mingling with the scents of cooking fires and market stalls. Still, for a city of over 1 million people, it was a marvel. Without it, Rome would have drowned in its own refuse. Private toilets in the home in wealthier homes. A toilet might be tucked into a small corner, often near the kitchen or the servants' quarters. It could be a simple stone seat over a drain, or a wooden bench with a clay pot beneath. Servants would empty these pots regularly. Sometimes they poured the contents into the sewer channels, other times into the street itself, usually at night when the city allowed refuse to be thrown from upper windows. The call, cave malum, beware the filth, would be shouted as a warning. If you heard it, you stepped quickly aside. The smells of the city, the Rome of poets and orators, smelled of incense, of flowers, of fresh-baked bread. But the Rome of daily life carried other scents too. In the early morning, when the streets were washed down, the air smelled faintly of wet dust and stone. By midday, the scents of cooked meats, of olive oil sizzling in pans, drifted through the alleys. But always, there was a background note, a faint, sour tang from the drains. The sharp bite of horse and mule dung ground into the paving stones by cartwheels. The earthy scent of too many bodies moving in close quarters. It was not unpleasant to them. 'Twas simply Rome, an imperfect triumph for all its flaws. The Roman sanitation system was centuries ahead of many other cities, where others relied on open pits or no system at all. Rome built sewers, aqueducts, and public facilities that allowed a vast population to survive in close quarters. It reminds us that civilization is not measured only in art or philosophy or politics, but in the hidden, unglamorous systems that allowed daily life to continue. In Rome, the body was not simply a private vessel. It was a part of the public image, a reflection of status, health, and power. And nowhere was this more visible than in the rituals surrounding intimacy. We often imagine the Roman world as decadent, full of wild feasts and indulgence. But behind the fantasies, there were real people, people with needs, with insecurities, and with very particular ways of preparing themselves for physical closeness. The preparation for intimacy in wealthier households. Intimacy was often preceded by ritual. A woman might begin with a bath, not just a quick rinse, but a slow, deliberate cleansing. Warm water poured over the skin, scented with herbs like rosemary or bay leaves. Servants would massage perfumed oils into her arms, her legs, her hair. The goal was not only cleanliness, but a certain texture, a softness to the skin, and a fragrance that lingered in the air. Men, too, prepared themselves. A wealthy Roman might visit the baths before an evening engagement, scraping away sweat and dust with a strigil, and finishing with a light layer of scented oil. For both men and women, smell was as important as appearance. Perfumes and oils. Roman perfumes were powerful, not the faint, airy scents of modern times, but deep, heavy aromas that clung to the body. They were made from rose, myrrh, cinnamon, cardamom, blended with olive or almond oil. Some were sweet and floral, others rich and musky. The right scent could be a kind of silent message, a whisper to the senses. But perfume also had a practical side. It masked odors in a world without daily showers. It covered the faint tang of sweat, the trace of smoke from cooking fires. And it lingered on the skin long after the lamps were blown out. Hair removal and skin care. Smooth skin was valued, especially for women, but also for some men. Wealthy Romans used pumice stones to gently scrape hair away, or mixtures of resin and pitch applied warm, then pulled away quickly. Some used tweezers. Others, harsh depilatory creams made from lime and arsenic. Dangerous, but effective. Afterward, the skin would be soothed with rosewater or oil. It was not only about beauty, it was about the feel of the body. Under the touch of another, teeth and breath intimacy meant closeness, and closeness meant breath. Romans cleaned their teeth with powders made from crushed bones, oyster shells, and charcoal. Some rinsed with wine or vinegar. Others chewed aromatic herbs like mint, parsley, or cinnamon sticks. But there were also stranger practices. Pliny the Elder, in his Natural History, mentions the use of urine as a mouthwash, imported, in the best cases, from Portugal. It was believed to whiten teeth, and perhaps it did. But the idea, to our modern sensibilities, is more shocking than seductive. The bedroom environment, Roman bedrooms, cubicula, were often small, windowless rooms lit by oil lamps. The bed might be a wooden frame with a woven base, topped with a mattress of straw, wool, or feathers. Sheets were linen, blankets, wool. Before intimacy, the room might be scented with incense or fresh herbs scattered on the floor. The lighting would be low, the flicker of a lamp softening the lines of the body. And in wealthier homes, musicians might play quietly nearby, their sounds drifting in from the atrium. Post-intimacy hygiene afterward. Cleansing was simple but essential. A small basin of water might be kept near the bed. Cloths would be dipped and the skin gently wiped. Some used wine, believed to be antiseptic. Others sprinkled the body with perfumed powder. There was also a belief, especially among physicians like Galen, that certain herbs could protect against illness or unwanted pregnancy when applied immediately after the act. These included pennyroyal, rue, and myrrh, sometimes mixed into pastes or oils. The less glamorous truth, of course, not everyone lived like this. In the crowded tenement buildings, insulae intimacy was far less private and far less fragrant. Water was fetched from public fountains, not heated in private baths. Oil was expensive, perfumes rarer still. For many, the body simply was what it was, carrying the scent of the day's labor, the dust of the street, and the heat of the sun. Desire still found its way, but without the layers of ritual enjoyed by the wealthy. The Roman world was not shy about the body. It was something to be celebrated, adorned, scented, and yes, prepared, especially when closeness was expected. For us, the idea of preparing for intimacy might seem simple. A quick shower, perhaps some fragrance, and a glance in the mirror. But for a Roman, this could be a slow ritual that unfolded over hours, a kind of private performance, for oneself and for another. A woman's private chamber picture, a wealthy Roman woman in her chamber, a cubicula lined with soft hangings, the walls painted with warm ochre and deep red. A bronze mirror rests on a polished table beside it, combs of boxwood, pins of ivory, and little glass bottles holding precious oils. Her maidservants work around her in silence, except for the faint clink of pottery and the rustle of linen. One heats water in a small bronze basin over a brazier. Another brings a bowl of crushed herbs, mint for freshness, lavender for calm, and rosemary to cleanse. Her hair is loosened first, the heavy braids undone. The hair combed slowly with oil until it shines like polished walnut. The scent of the body's scent was not just a luxury in Rome, it was a language. A lover might recognize, another not by sight, but by the faint trail of perfume left in the air. Some scents were bold, spikenard from India, with its earthy sweetness. Others were light and floral, rose from Paestum or violet from the hills of Latium. The oil was warmed slightly before application, poured into the palm, then rubbed slowly into the skin until it glowed. These oils did more than smell pleasant. In a time without soap as we know it, oil was a cleanser, lifting away the dust of the day before being scraped or wiped off. And when the day's dirt was gone, fresh layer of scented oil was added, creating a thin, silky barrier on the skin. Men's preparations, men too, had their rituals. A senator might visit the public baths in the late afternoon, bathing not only to clean, but to be seen. After the plunge in the cold pool, he might sit while an attendant scraped away the oil and sweat. A fresh tunic, a dab of perfume to the neck and wrists. And for the bold, a touch to the hair or even the beard. The satirist Marshall once mocked men who overdid it, smelling more like perfume shops than people. But a subtle scent, well placed, was considered sophisticated, and could leave a lasting impression in the private hours to come. Jewelry and adornment for women, preparation for intimacy, was not only about the body, it was about presentation. Earrings of gold or polished glass. A necklace of pearls believed to be an aphrodisiac in itself. Bracelets that caught the lamplight. The poet Ovid advised women in his Ars Amatoria to know the art of undressing, to let a bangle slide down an arm, to let a shoulder strap loosen in just the right way. Even in the most private rooms, beauty was still a performance. Oral freshness, breath mattered. The ideal Roman kiss was not hurried. It was long and lingering, a mingling of breaths, which meant steps had to be taken. Tooth powders might be made from charcoal, baking soda-like ash, and salt. For those with the means, crushed pearls or amber might be added. After brushing, a rinse with wine, honey water, or mint tea could leave the mouth sweet. Pliny's infamous mention of urine as a tooth whitener is still debated. Imported Portuguese urine was considered especially potent due to its concentration from diet. To us, it sounds vile. But to a Roman with stained teeth, it might have been worth the unpleasantness. The stage of the room, the physical setting for intimacy, was carefully arranged. Beds might be covered with dyed blankets, purple if one was truly wealthy, red or saffron for warmth. Fresh sheets might be scented by storing them with dried lavender or rose petals. Lighting was an art in itself, too bright, and flaws showed. Too dim, and beauty was lost. The perfect light came from a single oil lamp, its flame flickering, casting shadows that softened every edge. Sounds and sensations Romans were not silent lovers. Music was sometimes played. A single flute, the gentle strum of a lyre. Curtains were drawn not for modesty, but to trap warmth. And the scent of incense might drift from a nearby burner. Some households even had scented smoke, herbs thrown into the brazier to create a warm, perfumed air. It was said to make the skin feel more sensitive and the mind more open to pleasure. After the act post-intimacy, there was often a shared cleansing. A bowl of warm water brought to the bed. A cloth dipped and passed back and forth. The poet Propertius speaks of lovers washing each other's hands and faces afterward, an act as intimate as the embrace itself. There were also practical reasons for washing. Roman medicine believed that certain plants could prevent unwanted outcomes if applied in time. Infusions of myrrh, pennyroyal, or rue might be used. These were kept close at hand. Not openly displayed, but not hidden either. For the lower classes, this elegance was not universal. In the cramped, noisy rooms of the poor, intimacy might take place behind a thin curtain with the sounds of neighbors close by. The perfume might be the lingering aroma of the day's cooking, or the smoke from an oil lamp. Yet, in some ways, the simplicity was more honest. There were no layers of preparation, no careful staging, only two people finding warmth in the dark. Rome was a city of stone, of power, of endless noise, and yet, behind its marble facades and bustling streets, there were private worries. It's one of the most pressing, whether a union would lead to new life or not, in an age before science as we know it. Romans relied on a mixture of herbal knowledge, practical measures, and sheer superstition to control fate. The plant that vanished, silphium, the most famous, and perhaps most mysterious. Contraceptive of the ancient world was silphium, a plant that grew only in a narrow strip of North Africa near Cyrene. Its stalk was golden, its scent strong, and it was so valuable that it appeared on local coins. Roman women and men believed it could prevent pregnancy if taken regularly. It was consumed in tiny amounts, mixed with wine or food. So desired was it. That it was harvested to extinction sometime in the 1st century AD. Some say the last stalk was given to Emperor Nero himself. He, reportedly, ate it. Other herbal methods with silphium gone, Romans turned to other plants. Pennyroyal, called Pullium, was known to be potent, though dangerous in high doses. Rue, myrrh, and asafoetida were also common. These herbs could be drunk as infusions, or applied in more direct, intimate ways. Medical writers like Cyrannus of Ephesus documented recipes, often with alarming ingredients: wine, olive oil, pomegranate rind, even powdered metals. Some mixtures were to be inserted, others to be worn as amulets. Mechanical and physical methods. Contrary to popular belief, the Romans did have barrier methods. Some were made of linen soaked in herbal concoctions. Others, for the wealthy, were thin sheaths made from animal intestines or bladder. These were often used more to prevent disease than pregnancy, but could serve both purposes. There were also practices of withdrawal, counted days, and even the belief that certain sexual positions were safer, though these were based more on theory than fact. The role of the midwife, midwives, or obstetresses were central figures in this realm. They knew which herbs grew in which season, how to mix a potion so that it tasted pleasant but still worked, and, in some cases, how to quietly end a pregnancy if it was unwanted. The line between contraception and abortion was blurred. Roman law had no clear definition, and the decision often rested with the paterfamilias, the male head of the household. Amulets and magic, for some. The answer did not lie in plants at all. A woman might wear an amulet carved from jet, believed to cool the womb. Others tied small pouches containing animal bones or teeth around their waist. One common charm was a small bronze phallus, not for arousal, but for protection against the evil eye. It was thought that envy could cause infertility, and a visible, even exaggerated, symbol of virility could ward off that curse. Superstitions around timing. Romans observed the moon closely. Some believed that conception was more likely or less under certain lunar phases. Others avoided intimacy during storms, fearing that Jupiter's wrath could strike the child in the womb. There were even seasonal beliefs. Spring was considered ideal for conceiving strong, healthy children, while winter was thought to bring pale, sickly offspring. The moral layer. Interestingly, while Roman society was not prudish about sex, there was moral judgment around intentionally avoiding children. Philosophers like Seneca argued that the purpose of marriage was to produce heirs. Yet in the bustling, crowded streets of Rome, many couples quietly, skillfully resisted that duty. In the shadows of history, the truth is, much of this knowledge was whispered from woman to woman, passed in kitchens, in market stalls, or during the long hours in the baths. It was never fully recorded because it was women's knowledge. Private, powerful, and often invisible to the male historians who wrote Rome's story. And so, as we try to reconstruct it now, we're left with fragments. A recipe in a medical text. A casual mention in a poem. A skeleton buried with a small pouch of herbs at her waist. Imagine a Roman dawn. The first glow slipping over the tiled rooftops. The smell of yesterday's bread, still warm from the embers. And in a small room above a bustling street, a woman sits at a low table. Her hair is loose, falling over her shoulders. And before her, in a small bronze bowl, herbs are being crushed to powder. She is not making perfume, nor medicine. Not in the sense a man might understand. This is a preparation for the body, but not for beauty. It is for prevention. Herbs and oils. The secret language of protection to the untrained eye. The plants look ordinary. Dried sprigs of rue, their small green leaves brittle in the morning light. A scattering of pomegranate rind, deep red and curling like old parchment. A few drops of thick olive oil to bind the powder into a paste. Each ingredient carried layers of meaning. Rue was believed to cool the womb, slowing the quickening of life. Pomegranate, with its many seeds, might seem to symbolize fertility. Yet in Roman herbal lore, its bitter rind was used to keep fertility away. The oil was practical. It allowed the mixture to be applied internally, a method Roman women whispered about in the steam-filled corners of the thermae. Some used wine instead, a strong Falernian, bitter and heady, believed to dry the womb. The quiet business of midwives knew more than physicians about these matters. A medicus might write of the body in abstract terms, but an obstetrix held her knowledge in the palm of her hand. She knew which herbs caused cramping, which ones to avoid for fear of permanent harm, and how to disguise the bitter taste of a potion so a husband would not suspect. Sometimes her work was open and celebrated, helping a woman conceive when years of trying had failed. Other times it was carried out in silence, a whispered consultation at night, a small package slipped into a basket beneath figs and olives. Her payment might be coins, or a length of dyed wool, or simply the promise that when her own daughter came of age, the same service would be given in return. Mechanical aids. From linen to leather, some Roman women used physical barriers. Small pouches of linen, tied with a cord and soaked in herbal mixtures before being placed. The wealthy sometimes had access to thin sheaths made from animal bladder or intestines, imported at a cost from distant provinces. Though rare, archaeological finds have suggested that such items were known and traded, often hidden in boxes alongside cosmetics and jewelry. There were also sponges, soft, absorbent, cut to size and coated with oils or vinegar before use. These could be purchased in the marketplace, though their purpose was often described vaguely, as if to avoid too many knowing glances. The power of timing without the modern understanding of ovulation, Romans still observed patterns, though their interpretations were bound to superstition. Some women avoided intimacy during the full moon, believing its light pulled on the fluids of the body, increasing the chance of conception. Others believed the opposite, that the moon's fullness closed the womb and sought it out as a time for safe pleasure. Seasonal beliefs ran deep. Spring, with its abundance of life, was feared for its fertility. Winter, when the earth lay bare, was thought to mirror a woman's womb, less likely to conceive. Amulets and charms, not all protection came from herbs and cloth. Some women relied on magic, a thread dyed with the blood of a black cat worn around the ankle during intimacy. Others hung small bronze phalluses, faustina, above the marital bed, believing them to confuse or frighten away the spirits that might bring unwanted pregnancy. In rural areas, a clove of garlic hung above the doorway was said to have the same effect. Some charms were portable, tiny carved stones worn inside the folds of clothing, smooth from years of being touched in moments of worry. The blurred line between prevention and ending it is important to understand that in Roman thought, pregnancy was not considered certain until the child quickened, until the mother felt movement. This meant that some methods we might now call abortive were simply considered part of prevention. A strong infusion of pennyroyal or silphium might be taken weeks after intimacy, described only as a cleansing of the womb. Philosophers debated the morality. But in the kitchens and courtyards, the practice continued, passed down as family knowledge. Whispers through time, we will never know every detail of these ancient methods. They were, by nature, secret. Most were never written down, for to record them was to risk the judgment of law, or gods, or husbands. Instead, they lived in the hands and voices of women, in the way a midwife reached for a certain jar without looking, in the way a mother pressed a pouch of herbs into her daughter's palm the night before her wedding, even in the grand marble city of Rome, where aqueducts brought water from miles away, and senators debated the fate of nations. Such private matters were handled in silence. The streets of ancient Rome held more than marble and markets. They held whispers, whispers that traveled faster than carts, faster than the river's flow, whispers that could ruin a name before the morning bread cooled. Rome liked to think of itself as moral, disciplined, guided by the stern virtues of its ancestors. But beneath that public image, the private appetites of the people, both humble and powerful, were messy, unpredictable, and often completely at odds with the laws they passed. The ideal versus the reality. Public morality was paraded like a banner. The Senate spoke of gravitas, dignity, and pudictia, chastity, as the foundation of the Roman home. Wives were expected to be modest, loyal, silent in public affairs. Husbands were to be disciplined, protecting their family name above all. And yet, the law itself allowed certain freedoms, for men, that is. A man could sleep with slaves, prostitutes, or concubines without scandal, as long as they were not married women from respectable families. For women, the line was far stricter. Even suspicion could destroy her. Not only would her reputation collapse, but she could lose her dowry, her wealth, and be cast out from her family's protection. Adultery, the crime of the elite in 18 BCE. Emperor Augustus introduced the Lex Julia de Adulterius Coercendus, a law meant to curb immorality in the upper classes. It made adultery a public crime. A father could kill his daughter and her lover if caught in the act. A husband could not kill his wife, but he was required to divorce her and denounce her publicly. For the poor, the law mattered little, but in the villas of senators, it became a weapon. Enemies spied on one another, hoping to catch rivals in compromising positions. Letters were intercepted, servants bribed, bedroom doors watched. Public punishments, the punishment for adultery, could be exiled to an island. Not a tropical paradise, but a lonely, wind-swept rock in the sea. One famous case was that of Julia, the elder, daughter of Augustus himself. Beautiful, clever, and widely admired, she was accused of numerous affairs. The scandal was so great that Augustus had her banished to the tiny island of Pantiteria, with no men allowed to visit, not even her own son. She lived there for years, her once luxurious life reduced to bare survival. Sacred taboos. Some relationships were not just illegal, they were unthinkable. Priestesses of Vesta, the keepers of Rome's sacred fire, were sworn to 30 years of chastity. If one broke her vow, the punishment was not exile, but death. Buried alive in a small underground chamber with only a lamp, bread, and water, enough to make it appear she had not been killed directly, for spilling the blood of a Vestal was forbidden. It was a slow, silent erasure, a warning to every woman who walked past the temple. Pleasure and hypocrisy. Despite these strict laws, Rome was not prudish about desire itself. Erotic art adorned dining rooms, and phallic charms hung over doorways for luck. Brothels operated openly, marked with carvings or paintings of the services inside. Public baths often had side rooms where more intimate transactions could occur. There was even an annual festival, the Floralia, where actors performed in little more than garlands, and some dances were so explicit that more conservative citizens refused to attend. The market for scandal. Romans craved stories of the powerful caught in acts of weakness. Tavern, gossip, street theater, and even political speeches could carry sharp hints about someone's private life. A crooked senator might be accused of bedding another man's wife. A general could be mocked for his fondness for handsome young men in his camp. Sometimes these rumors were true. Other times they were invented entirely. A political dagger slipped between the ribs, wounding not the body, but the name. Why morality mattered so much. Rome's obsession with sexual morality was not purely about virtue. It was about power, and about controlling inheritance. In a world where property passed through bloodlines, Knowing whose child was whose was not just a matter of pride, but of law and wealth. A woman's fidelity protected the integrity of a family's fortune. A man's reputation ensured his political survival. And so the bedroom became a battlefield, just as dangerous in its way as any fought with sword and shield. Imagine a city where power and pride meant everything, where a single whisper could strip a man of his Senate seat, or see a woman cast out into the streets with nothing but the clothes on her back. That was Rome, a place where morality was preached loudly from the rostra in the forum, while the same men who gave the speeches slipped away through shaded gardens and quiet side streets into the arms of their lovers. The tightrope of reputation for the Roman elite, life was a careful balance between public image and private indulgence. The laws of the Republic, and later the Empire, were written to preserve mos maiorum, the customs of the ancestors. It was a set of unwritten moral codes, idealizing the stern, disciplined farmer-soldier of old. But in the marble palaces along the Palatine Hill, those ancient ideals were negotiable. A senator might thunder about the dangers of moral decay in the morning, then attend a private banquet by night, where wine flowed freely, musicians played suggestive songs, and the dancers wore less than was decent. Case study: Claudia Metelli, the femme fatale of Rome. One of the most notorious women in Roman gossip was Claudia Metelli. She was wealthy, politically connected, and, according to her enemies, dangerously charming. Cicero, the great orator, accused her of everything from adultery to poisoning her husband. He painted her as a seductress who moved freely among poets, including the lovesick Catullus, whose poems about Lesbia, widely believed to be Claudia, still survive today. In court, Claudia's accusers tried to destroy her by linking her to scandal after scandal. Was it true? No one could say for certain. But in Rome, the hint of impropriety could be as fatal as the act itself. The emperor's bedroom as public property, if you think the private life of rulers today is subject to public curiosity. In Rome, it was worse. An emperor's personal behavior could define his legacy. Tiberius, for example, retreated to the island of Capri in his later years. And stories began to spread of bizarre and depraved entertainments there. Some say these were exaggerated by political enemies. Others claim they were all true, and worse than anyone dared write. Caligula openly flouted Roman sexual taboos, attending banquets with his sisters and even parading one of them as his wife. Whether from madness, arrogance, or simply a desire to shock, he shattered the delicate illusion that emperors were guardians of morality. The law as a weapon. When Augustus introduced his adultery law, it was not just about cleaning up Roman morals. It was also a tool for control. A political rival could be accused of infidelity, true or not, and dragged into court. The trial was public, the humiliation complete. Even an acquittal left a stain. And because women were often blamed more harshly than men, the law reinforced the idea that female virtue was the foundation of the household, and that any crack in that foundation endangered Rome itself. Double standards and desire. Men could visit a brothel, keep a mistress, or even engage with male lovers without serious risk to their status, so long as these partners were of lower social rank. A woman, on the other hand, could lose everything over a single lover. The fear was not purely about morals. It was about inheritance. If a wife bore a child by another man, the family's wealth and bloodline could be stolen, one silent night at a time. The Vestal's silent burden. The Vestal virgins lived in the heart of Rome, their temple beside the Forum, their white robes a symbol of purity. For 30 years, they served the goddess Vesta, keeping the sacred fire burning. If the flame went out, Rome feared disaster. If a Vestal broke her vow of chastity, Rome demanded her death. The burial ritual was chilling. The condemned Vestal was led through the Forum in silence, faces turning away as she passed. She was placed in an underground cell with a bed, a lamp, and a little food. The entrance was sealed. The city returned to its noise and light. And beneath their feet, the earth held its secret. Festivals of contradiction, even as Rome punished sexual misconduct, it celebrated fertility and pleasure in its festivals. During the Lupercalia, men dressed in little more than goatskins ran through the streets, lightly striking women with strips of hide to promote fertility. The Floralia was even more daring. A riot of color, flowers, and theatrical performances that sometimes ended with nude dancing. For a few days, the rules bent. The laughter was louder than the lectures. And Rome remembered that it was human, the quiet economy of secrets behind the respectable facades. There was a hidden market, not for goods, but for silence. Household slaves saw everything. They knew who visited, who left in the early hours, whose bed sheets were changed more often than the rest. A well-placed bribe could make a witness disappear. A threat could make a story vanish. But sometimes, slave freed and holding a grudge would sell their knowledge to the highest bidder. And in the echoing marble halls of the Senate, another career would end. In the end, Roman morality was a performance, a play acted out for the sake of stability and power. The audience, the people, cheered for virtue by day, and by night sought out their own pleasures in the shadows of the city. In the twisting streets of ancient Rome, between the grandeur of the temples and the bustle of the marketplaces, there existed another economy, one not recorded in official ledgers, yet as old as the city itself. It was the trade of desire, and in Rome, desire had a price. Legal but labeled, unlike in many later societies, prostitution in Rome was not illegal. The Lex Julia de Adulterius, the same set of laws that punished adultery, did not forbid sex work itself. Instead, it regulated it. Those who sold their bodies for coin were required to register with the aediles, the magistrates who oversaw public order. Their names were entered into a public record, and from that moment they lost certain rights. They could not marry into respectable families. They could not bring accusations of slander, for in the eyes of the law, their reputation was already beyond saving. Pause, softer, but in the shadowed corners of the Suburra district, far from the Senate's debates. This trade thrived. The brothel, a world within a world. Roman brothels were not the plush, dimly lit establishments of later European cities. Most were cramped two-story buildings, their lower floors divided into small stone rooms, barely large enough for a bed. The walls were often painted with frescoes, explicit images that served both as decoration and advertisement. The images were crude, not because the artists lacked skill, but because clarity was the point. The customers did not come here for poetry. Each room had a curtain, sometimes a wooden door. A narrow oil lamp offered the only light. The smell of perfume mixed with sweat, wine, and damp stone. If you wandered the streets of Rome at midday, you'd see merchants haggling over figs and olives, citizens gathered at the forum, children chasing each other around fountains. But if you lingered into the afternoon, if you let your feet carry you away from the marble plazas into the narrower lanes, where the buildings leaned so close they almost kissed overhead, you'd begin to notice a change. The air would smell faintly of spiced wine and incense. The chatter of the marketplace would fade, replaced by low laughter and the kind of greetings given only to familiar, returning patrons. The Suburra, Rome's red light heartbeat, the Suburra district, dense and noisy, was the beating heart of Rome's sex trade. It wasn't hidden. Prostitution was as public as the baker's stall. Signs were painted on walls, sometimes discreet symbols, sometimes explicit images, pointing customers toward the nearest lupaner, the brothel. The name lupaner came from lupa, meaning chevalf. It was a slang term for prostitute, and one that carried a bite of insult, but also a raw, primal allure. In the Suburra, lupi sat in doorways, calling to passersby, sometimes wearing nothing but a loose cloak that could be swept aside in an instant. Inside a lupaner. Step through the door of a brothel, and you entered another Rome entirely. The rooms were small, barely wide enough for a straw mattress, with a single oil lamp casting shadows against the painted walls. The paintings were not art in the decorative sense. They were a menu. Each showed a sexual act, often labeled with the price, so there could be no confusion between client and worker. Some brothels had stone beds covered with simple mattresses or blankets. Others were even cruder. Just a raised wooden platform or a pile of straw. Privacy was minimal. The sound of footsteps in the hallway, the laughter of other clients, the moans from the next room, all bled together. The air was thick with the scent of wine, sweat, cheap perfume made from myrtle or cinnamon, and the faint, constant smoke of oil lamps. The workers, not all sex workers, were the same. At the bottom were the streetwalkers, often slaves sent out by their owners to earn coin. They might work against the walls of a tavern, in alleys, or in doorways marked with discreet graffiti indicating services available. Above them were the registered brothel workers, freemen and freedwomen who paid taxes to the state. They were often immigrants or former slaves who had bought their freedom but had no other trade. At the top were the courtesans, educated, well-dressed, often musicians or poets. These women catered to senators, generals, and wealthy merchants. They did not work from brothels, but from private apartments, receiving guests with wine, music, and conversation before anything else. For them, the transaction was as much about prestige as pleasure. The economics of desire prices varied wildly. A quick encounter with a street worker might cost a single quadrans. The smallest bronze coin, less than the price of a loaf of bread. In contrast, a night with an elite courtesan could cost more than a month's wages for a laborer, paid not only in coin, but in gifts. Jewelry, fine clothes, rare perfumes. Owners of large brothels kept careful accounts. Slaves might be required to meet a quota each day, the earnings flowing entirely to their master. Freedwomen working for themselves kept a portion for rent and the rest for survival. For the state, prostitution was a taxable trade, another stream of revenue in a city always hungry for coin. Brothels and taverns, the worlds of drinking and sex, were deeply intertwined. Many taverns had back rooms or upper floors functioning as informal brothels. A man could come for wine and leave with more than just a hangover. Some even advertised special packages, a jug of wine, a meal, and an hour with a girl. In these settings, the line between barmaid and prostitute was often blurred. The Popinay low-class taverns were notorious for this. They were haunts for gamblers, thieves, and those seeking quick pleasures. Morality and hypocrisy. Though prostitution was legal, it was not respected. A prostitute, once registered, could never reclaim her honorable status. No matter how wealthy she became, no matter how influential her lovers were, she was still considered infamous, a person without legal honor. And yet, the same men who condemned them in public were often their best customers in private. Senators spoke of moral decay while sneaking into the Subura after sunset. Priests preached about virtue, then were caught visiting the very women they called sinful. The hypocrisy was an open secret, and one the city tolerated, because desire, like hunger, could not truly be outlawed. The famous and the infamous, some prostitutes became legends in their own lifetimes. One named Cythris was a freedwoman who rose to become the lover of the famous orator Mark Antony. She attended him at public events, a scandal in itself, and was said to have been clever, witty, and skilled in conversation as well as the bedroom. Another Flora was so renowned for her beauty that she became the namesake of the Floralia Festival, a celebration filled with theater, flowers, and public nudity. The end of the night, as the moon rose over the city, the brothels stayed busy. Oil lamps burned low, wine flowed, and in the flickering half-light, Rome revealed its most human face. Hungry, flawed, seeking warmth in whatever form it could be bought. By dawn, shutters closed, curtains were drawn, and the city dressed itself again in marbled dignity. But in the Subura, the smell of perfume and smoke lingered in the air. A reminder that, Beneath the laws and the speeches, Rome's oldest trade never truly slept. In Rome, the body was not simply a private vessel. It was a part of the public image, a reflection of status, health, and power. And nowhere was this more visible than in the rituals surrounding intimacy. We often imagine the Roman world as decadent, full of wild feasts and indulgence. But behind the fantasies, there were real people with needs, with insecurities, and with very particular ways of preparing themselves for physical closeness. The preparation for intimacy in wealthier households. Intimacy was often preceded by ritual. A woman might begin with a bath, not just a quick rinse, but a slow, deliberate cleansing. Warm water poured over the skin, scented with herbs like rosemary or bay leaves. Servants would massage perfumed oils into her arms, her legs, her hair. The goal was not only cleanliness, but a certain texture, a softness to the skin, and a fragrance that lingered in the air. Men, too, prepared themselves. A wealthy Roman might visit the baths before an evening engagement, scraping away sweat and dust with a strigil, and finishing with a light layer of scented oil. For both men and women, smell was as important as appearance. Perfumes and oils. Roman perfumes were powerful. Not the faint, airy scents of modern times, but deep, heavy aromas that clung to the body. They were made from rose, myrrh, cinnamon, cardamom, blended with olive or almond oil. Some were sweet and floral, others rich and musky. The right scent could be a kind of silent message, a whisper to the senses. But perfume also had a practical side. It masked odors in a world without daily showers. It covered the faint tang of sweat, the trace of smoke from cooking fires. And it lingered on the skin long after the lamps were blown out. Hair removal and skin care. Smooth skin was valued, especially for women, but also for some men. Wealthy Romans used pumice stones to gently scrape hair away, or mixtures of resin and pitch applied warm, then pulled away quickly. Some used tweezers, others harsh depilatory creams made from lime and arsenic. Dangerous, but effective. Afterward, the skin would be soothed with rosewater or oil. It was not only about beauty, it was about the feel of the body. Under the touch of another, teeth and breath intimacy meant closeness, and closeness meant breath. Romans cleaned their teeth with powders made from crushed bones, oyster shells, and charcoal. Some rinsed with wine or vinegar. Others chewed aromatic herbs like mint, parsley, or cinnamon sticks. But there were also stranger practices. Pliny the Elder, in his Natural History, mentions the use of urine as a mouthwash, imported, in the best cases, from Portugal. It was believed to whiten teeth, and perhaps it did. But the idea, to our modern sensibilities, is more shocking than seductive. The bedroom environment, Roman bedrooms, cubicula, were often small, windowless rooms lit by oil lamps. The bed might be a wooden frame with a woven base, topped with a mattress of straw, wool, or feathers. Sheets were linen, blankets, wool. Before intimacy, the room might be scented with incense or fresh herbs scattered on the floor. The lighting would be low, the flicker of a lamp softening the lines of the body. And in wealthier homes, musicians might play quietly nearby, their sounds drifting in from the atrium. Post-intimacy hygiene afterward. Cleansing was simple but essential. A small basin of water might be kept near the bed. Cloths would be dipped and the skin gently wiped. Some used wine, believed to be antiseptic. Others sprinkled the body with perfumed powder. There was also a belief, especially among physicians like Galen, that certain herbs could protect against illness or unwanted pregnancy when applied immediately after the act. These included pennyroyal, rue, and myrrh, sometimes mixed into pastes or oils. The less glamorous truth, of course, not everyone lived like this. In the crowded tenement buildings, insulae intimacy was far less private and far less fragrant. Water was fetched from public fountains, not heated in private baths. Oil was expensive, perfumes rarer still. For many, the body simply was what it was, carrying the scent of the day's labor, the dust of the street, and the heat of the sun. Desire still found its way, but without the layers of ritual enjoyed by the wealthy. The Roman world was not shy about the body. It was something to be celebrated, adorned, scented, and yes, prepared, especially when closeness was expected. For us, the idea of preparing for intimacy might seem simple. A quick shower, perhaps some fragrance, and a glance in the mirror. But for a Roman, this could be a slow ritual that unfolded over hours, a kind of private performance, for oneself and for another. A woman's private chamber picture, a wealthy Roman woman in her chamber, a cubicula lined with soft hangings, the walls painted with warm ochre and deep red. A bronze mirror rests on a polished table beside it, combs of boxwood, pins of ivory, and little glass bottles holding precious oils. Her maidservants work around her in silence, except for the faint clink of pottery and the rustle of linen. One heats water in a small bronze basin over a brazier. Another brings a bowl of crushed herbs, mint for freshness, lavender for calm, and rosemary to cleanse. Her hair is loosened first, the heavy braids undone. The hair combed slowly with oil until it shines like polished walnut. The scent of the body's scent was not just a luxury in Rome, it was a language. A lover might recognize, another not by sight, but by the faint trail of perfume left in the air. Some scents were bold, spikenard from India, with its earthy sweetness. Others were light and floral, rose from Paestum or violet from the hills of Latium. The oil was warmed slightly before application, poured into the palm, then rubbed slowly into the skin until it glowed. These oils did more than smell pleasant. In a time without soap as we know it, oil was a cleanser, lifting away the dust of the day before being scraped or wiped off. And when the day's dirt was gone, fresh layer of scented oil was added, creating a thin, silky barrier on the skin. Men's preparations, men too, had their rituals. A senator might visit the public baths in the late afternoon, bathing not only to clean, but to be seen. After the plunge in the cold pool, he might sit while an attendant scraped away the oil and sweat. A fresh tunic, a dab of perfume to the neck and wrists. And for the bold, a touch to the hair or even the beard. The satirist Martial once mocked men who overdid it, smelling more like perfume shops than people. But a subtle scent, well placed, was considered sophisticated, and could leave a lasting impression in the private hours to come. Jewelry and adornment for women, preparation for intimacy, was not only about the body, it was about presentation. Earrings of gold or polished glass. A necklace of pearls believed to be an aphrodisiac in itself. Bracelets that caught the lamplight. The poet Ovid advised women in his Ars Amatoria to know the art of undressing, to let a bangle slide down an arm, to let a shoulder strap loosen in just the right way. Even in the most private rooms, beauty was still a performance. Oral freshness, breath mattered. The ideal Roman kiss was not hurried. It was long and lingering, a mingling of breaths, which meant steps had to be taken. Tooth powders might be made from charcoal, baking soda-like ash, and salt. For those with the means, crushed pearls or amber might be added. After brushing, a rinse with wine, honey water, or mint tea could leave the mouth sweet. Pliny's infamous mention of urine as a tooth whitener is still debated. Imported Portuguese urine was considered especially potent due to its concentration from diet. To us, it sounds vile. But to a Roman with stained teeth, it might have been worth the unpleasantness. The stage of the room, the physical setting for intimacy, was carefully arranged. Beds might be covered with dyed blankets, purple if one was truly wealthy, red or saffron for warmth. Fresh sheets might be scented by storing them with dried lavender or rose petals. Lighting was an art in itself, too bright, and flaws showed. Too dim, and beauty was lost. The perfect light came from a single oil lamp, its flame flickering, casting shadows that softened every edge. Sounds and sensations Romans were not silent lovers. Music was sometimes played. A single flute, the gentle strum of a lyre. Curtains were drawn not for modesty, but to trap warmth. And the scent of incense might drift from a nearby burner. Some households even had scented smoke, herbs thrown into the brazier to create a warm, perfumed air. It was said to make the skin feel more sensitive and the mind more open to pleasure. After the act post-intimacy, there was often a shared cleansing. A bowl of warm water brought to the bed. A cloth dipped and passed back and forth. The poet Propertius speaks of lovers washing each other's hands and faces afterward, an act as intimate as the embrace itself. There were also practical reasons for washing. Roman medicine believed that certain plants could prevent unwanted outcomes if applied in time. Infusions of myrrh, pennyroyal, or rue might be used. These were kept close at hand. Not openly displayed, but not hidden either. For the lower classes, this elegance was not universal. In the cramped, noisy rooms of the poor, intimacy might take place behind a thin curtain with the sounds of neighbors close by. The perfume might be the lingering aroma of the day's cooking, or the smoke from an oil lamp. Yet, in some ways, the simplicity was more honest. There were no layers of preparation, no careful staging, only two people finding warmth in the dark. The streets of ancient Rome were never truly quiet. The clatter of wagon wheels on stone, the shouts of market vendors, the distant hammering of blacksmiths, all merged into the daily music of the city. But tucked away, just beyond the main thoroughfares, were places where another kind of business was conducted. The public latrines. A first step inside, imagine you are walking into one of these latrines for the first time. The doorway is low and shadowed. You push past a heavy curtain, not for privacy, but to keep out flies. Inside, the air is warm and damp. It smells faintly of ammonia, of wet stone, of the faint. Sour trace of human waste masked beneath a haze of incense smoke from a nearby brazier. A soft trickle of water echoes beneath your feet. A narrow channel carrying away what nature has left behind. The seating stone benches line the walls, each with neat, evenly spaced holes cut into the surface. Oval-shaped. Some wide enough to allow a man in full toga to sit comfortably. Others narrower, perhaps designed for children. Between the seated positions, there is no wall, no door, no modesty screen. You sit beside strangers. You can see the expressions on their faces, hear every small movement, and smell everything. A social space for the Romans, to relieve oneself was not a solitary act. Here, inside these communal rooms, men and sometimes women in certain districts sat in long rows, talking of politics, gossiping about neighbors, or conducting business transactions while nature ran its course. The soft splash beneath them was background noise, no different to the trickle of a fountain. The sponge-o-nestic in place of toilet paper, there was the tersorium, a wooden stick with a sponge tied to the end. When you finished your business, you would dip the sponge into a shallow trough of running water that ran just in front of the seating area. Sometimes vinegar was added to the water. Often it was not. And yes, the same sponge was used by everyone, a shared instrument of cleanliness and disease. Water in constant motion beneath the stone seats. A channel of water ran continuously, carrying away the waste toward the city's main sewer lines. Above the seats, another narrow gutter brought fresh water to rinse the tersorium. But in times of drought, that fresh water might be recycled bathwater or street runoff. Not so fresh at all. More than just toilets, these spaces were decorated too. Some walls bore painted scenes, mythological figures, pastoral landscapes, and in some cases, frankly explicit artwork, not to scandalize, but to normalize. In Rome, the human body was less a private mystery and more a public fact. Rome, for all its splendor, was a city balanced precariously between civilization and chaos. marble temples and glittering forums above, a dark, wet, foul-smelling labyrinth below. That labyrinth was the Cloaca Maxima, the Great Sewer, a river beneath the city, beneath the paved streets. Under homes, markets, and even the great temples ran a system of vaulted tunnels wide enough for a man to stand in. It began humbly, a drainage ditch carved by Rome's earliest kings to channel water away from the marshy valleys. Over centuries, it grew into one of the largest engineering feats of the ancient world. The constant flow rainwater, overflow from fountains, waste from public latrines, and the dirty runoff of the city's bathhouses all fed into the Cloaca Maxima. The tunnels carried this gray-brown torrent downhill toward the river Tiber. From above, the city remained dry. From below, smell was never far away. Where beauty met filth, Rome's aqueducts brought in fresh water from the hills. Its fountains and baths sparkled with clean flow. But the moment that water touched human hands or bodies, it became part of the sewer's burden. The same network that carried away bathwater also transported the contents of chamber pots. Street runoff, animal dung, and the daily output of hundreds of thousands of people. A dangerous luxury to modern ears. A sewer sounds like a mark of progress, but in Rome, it could be deadly. In heavy rain, the Cloaca Maxima would overflow, spewing waste back into the streets, into courtyards, even into the lower floors of homes. Parasites thrived. Rats scurried freely between sewer and street. And yet, this system was celebrated as a marvel, a sign that Rome had tamed nature. The workers below maintenance crews, often slaves or condemned criminals, entered the tunnels to clear blockages. They worked by torchlight, up to their knees or waists in filth. The air was heavy with methane. One spark, and the tunnels could explode in flame. Few survived long in this line of work. The discharge into the Tiber ultimately, everything the city discarded found its way into the Tiber River. Here, the waste mixed with the river's natural current and sometimes with the drinking water of those downstream. Children splashed in its shallows. Fishermen cast their nets. It was a river of life and a river of death. Not every Roman answered nature's call in the bustling echo of a public latrine. For the wealthy, the senators, the merchants, the grandees of the city, relief could be taken in a place far more private and far more dangerous. The luxury of a private toilet. Step into a villa in Pompeii or Herculaneum. You might find a small stone-built seat in a corner of the kitchen, or even just beside the dining area. It seems absurd to us now. But to a Roman, the kitchen was the perfect place for a toilet. A constant water source, easy access to servants for cleaning, and the warmth of the cooking fire to keep smells from stagnating. And yet, those smells were never truly gone. Where did it go? In some houses, the waste dropped directly into a cesspit below the floor, a pit that might be emptied only once every few years. In others, a clay or stone chute connected to the nearest sewer line. This was considered modern. But it came with a terrible risk. During floods or when pressure built up in the sewer, the contents could surge back upward right into the house. The night soil men in cities without a full sewer connection, night soil men came to collect waste. They worked after dark, moving silently through alleys with buckets and carts. Their cargo, human excrement, was not simply discarded. It was sold to farmers outside the city as fertilizer. It was an economy built on human waste, turning filth into food, and food back into filth. The smell of Rome, even without the floods, odors clung to every street. Imagine, horses and donkeys pulling carts left dung in the road. Stray dogs scavenged waste heaps. Butcher shops poured blood into the gutters, and from kitchens and courtyards, privies released their own steady perfume. In summer, the heat thickened the air. Flies swarmed in clouds, and the sweet, sour, metallic scent of the city was inescapable. Parasites and plague flies carried waste from the latrines to food stalls. Sewage ran openly in some districts. The result? a constant churn of intestinal diseases, worms, and fevers that claimed thousands of lives each year. The grandeur of Rome stood on marble foundations, but also on layers of rot. The Romans built aqueducts, sewers, and toilets that astonish engineers even today. But they lived in a world where cleanliness was never guaranteed, and where the scent of civilization was always tinged with decay.